I'll have the bacon cheeseburger.
Got it. That'll be right up.
Oh, man. I wish I would have gotten that. You know what to do. Audible. Chicken wing, chicken wing, chicken wing. 42, 42.
I got you, Rocco.
There's nothing better than getting what you want, and Sweet Caroline's Kitchen and Cocktails has everything you want. Great burgers, sandwiches, wings, and more. Call an audible on your next meal out. Sweet Caroline's Kitchen and Cocktails, Ames.
A fuel choice that even rivals can agree on? Now that's worth the hype. Cheaper, cleaner, and homegrown. Pump it up with Unleaded 88.
Welcome into the Channel Seed Studios for the first ever episode of Bigger Than 12. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jake Brend. I work in Des Moines for Local 5 Sports, covering all things Iowa. But what's so awesome about this network and the Channel Seed Studios is that it can go anywhere, even to the deep south in Texas, where I'm joined by Derek Duke of Heartland College Sports. Derek, it's a pleasure, man. How are you doing?
Dude, I'm doing great. Other than I had to move locations today, as you guys know. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing to get this series started with this year, but I haven't had rain down here in like over probably a month and a half, and it started raining and my power went out, so I had to move locations for tonight's show. So hopefully that's a good thing. I don't know if it is or not, but I guess we'll find out here shortly.
We can lend you some. We had a wet summer up here in Iowa, and I know our Channel Seedsmen know all about that. I'm excited to be out there in Grand Junction tomorrow for that event. So this show, it's a Big 12 show. We're in Iowa. I'm obviously known on Twitter as hopefully a professional that happens to be an Iowa State fan, but some might know me as an Iowa State fan. This show, it's going to focus on the conference. We've kind of been talking in meetings. We're going to aim like 80% conference talk, 20% Iowa State talk. So I know this network's Iowa everywhere, but this really could be everywhere across the Heartland, I guess, if you want to consider Orlando and Provo the Heartland. But Derek is the premier Big 12 guy. He's the expert, and that's what's going to make this really, really fun. Derek, how excited are you to be a part of this?
Dude, I'm thrilled. I'm beyond thrilled. I got that call from Chris Williams, and many of you guys know Chris, with the company, everything. But he's one of those guys in the industry I really look up to. I always told him, I've told him and Tim Fitzgerald before at Kansas State. I said, you guys are really the guys that I look up to in this business, in this industry. And I anytime I get a chance to, I always try to read or listen to their work or whatever it may be. But really, really thankful to be here. And you mentioned I don't have true ties to Iowa. I might be the only person at the Iowa Everywhere network that doesn't have these ties, but I'm surely grateful to be here. I've been to the great state of Iowa 2 times already in the last few years, and hoping to go back soon. Of course, I absolutely loved it up there. The people are wonderful, and I remember I wrote an article about it a couple months ago when I went to the George Strait concert up there. It's the people of the great state of Iowa that make it such a wonderful place. And that's why I want to go back. It's not a question of if I'm going to go back. It's a question of when I'm going to go back. So really, really happy to be here. I want to give a shout out to obviously you, Jake, for letting me come on and co-host with you, bother you a little bit. And of course, Chris Williams, everybody here at the Iowa Network, Aiden, the guy that produces the show, does a wonderful job, been super, super kind. Everybody here has been really welcoming me with open arms, which is something I really, really enjoy and like to see. And, the other day I texted Matt Van Winkle and I said, man, just with all the additions that you guys have been putting on at this network from, Murph and Andy and the 2 guys named Chris and all these people that are starting to join this network. I texted Matt, I said, it really feels like we're putting together like the 92 Dream Team right now. And it truly feels like that because there's so many great talents here on this network, and super excited to be a part of it. And, you already mentioned that this is going to be Big 12 focused podcast, of course, by the name. But of course, we're going to give you some Iowa State info as well. My best way to describe this is it's the Big 12 from our perspective with some curveballs thrown in. It's the Big 12 with a splash of Iowa State. It's a shot of whiskey in your Busch Light, so to speak. So that's the way I could probably describe it, how we're going to run things here.
Yeah, back to the dream team. I'm happy to be Christian Leitner when we're hanging with the big dogs like Keith Murphy, Andy Fales, Chris Hassel, Chris Williams. Some of the best in the business, to name a few. But yeah, this show, obviously it's the first one, so we're not gonna commit like anything cement, but we've got a pretty solid rundown structure, if you will, built for this show. So how we're planning to start each episode, since this is going to release on Wednesdays, we're not going to react game by game to every Big 12 game just because it will be 3-4 days after. So instead, we're going to lead each show with a segment called the 12 and 12. And Derek and I are going to fire off kind of 12 questions, 12 topics. Think, pardon the interruption, about broad Big 12 takes, broad stroke ideas. For example, the one we used is Cam Rising the most underrated quarterback in the country? That stuff like that, we'll kind of riff back and forth for a couple minutes, go through those 12. And after that, we'll get into some Iowa State talk. And then we'll close with looking ahead to the following Saturday with some game picks that should be really fun. And we're going to sprinkle in some even more fun in there. And of course, it's all subject to change. We'll see what works, see what doesn't. But you come here each and every week, that can be a bit of what you expect. That kind of, like you said, Big 12 talk with a splash of Iowa State. And should we just get right into it? Start with the 12 and 12.
Man, I'm ready when you are. I'm super excited and super pumped. It's game week, so let's get this thing rolling, man.
Well, let's start with probably the hottest topic of the last week in the conference. Start with Colorado. Are they ready? That can go a lot of different ways.
I think you want to say it's going to be ready on what, because if you're thinking that you're one of those guys that places a bet, and I saw this stat the other day or a couple weeks ago that they had the most placed bets on them to win the Big 12, and
yeah,
you may, if you do that, you may as well put your money in a pile, burn it, and and walk away, because you're not going to see it again the same way you're not going to see that money payout return if you put that bet on Colorado. It's just not going to happen. Dion is prime time, but the team is just not there yet. Colorado, like last season, they're going to dominate September and and parts of maybe October on ESPN and Fox. Then they're more than likely going to fall off. I think Shedeur Sanders is a great quarterback. Travis Hunter, obviously a generational talent, but the offensive line for me is very concerning. It's filled with a bunch of transfers. They did the same plug and play thing last year where they brought in a bunch of guys and it didn't work out up front. And they did the same thing to do again this year. They replaced all their starters with a bunch of transfer portal guys. Defensively, they'll be improved, but honestly, when push comes to shove, this team is going to be lucky to get to a bowl game to me, because you look at that schedule, Jake, and it is brutal, man. I don't see a whole lot of wins here, and I know they have some, like I mentioned, some talent already, but the wins here, they're really, really hard to come by in this conference, and I think Colorado is going to find out the hard way once again.
Yeah, you can make the argument that they've got 2 of the 5 best players in the conference, but this is football. It's not basketball. You need the depth. And I don't trust that there's depth. I do trust that there's talent, but I certainly do not trust that there's culture. And that's where, who knows, maybe they do go out, beat the Bison of North Dakota State, upset Nebraska on the road, media hype train. But how is that team that's not very deep doing in October? And after maybe an upset loss, how do they respond? How does the locker room respond? Does Dion go and throw players under the bus and press? Like, that's a real question. So I'm with you. I think they struggle to make a bowl game. And if that bet was offered to make a bowl game or not, I would probably say no.
I got a question for you, Jake. How many media members are going to be left by the time the end of the season rolls around? Are they going to have anybody in that media room, or is he going to toss out everybody by the time the year comes?
Zero. Yeah, zero. We're going to have no idea what happens in Boulder each week, because press conferences will just be It'll be just him and the Colorado athletic staff, and we can get into that another time. I'm sure we will have some reactions to Prime's media festivities. If I'll put it in the nicest way possible. Are you sold on Avery Johnson?
Yes, but I think I have to throw a but in there. And I'm going to start off with saying I have not seen hype for a player in the Big 12 like Avery Johnson's getting. And I had to think about it. I think the last time that really struck me when a player got this much hype and attention in the preseason without really playing a significant amount of football, it was Kyler Murray back in Oklahoma back in 2018. Obviously, we know how that year ended for him. They went to the college football playoff. Kyler won the Heisman, and so it was a great year for Kyler. With Johnson, I think we've seen some definite flashes. He ran for 5 touchdowns against Texas Tech in that game. They beat NC State in the Pop-Tart Bowl, RIP to the Pop-Tart. But, I think the hype is real with Avery Johnson because I think, like I said, we've seen flashes of him do some really, really great things. But at the same time, as with any first-year starter within a good conference and a deep conference like this, you're going to see some growing pains. Like it's going to happen at some point. There's going to be a game where he's going to throw maybe 2 or 3 interceptions and maybe he wins it with his legs. Maybe he's able to run for 3 touchdowns in that game. I really don't know until we see it. Obviously these non-conference games are going to help him kind of get in the groove. Kansas State's schedule isn't brutal like some of the other teams in the conference. So maybe he's able to build that confidence as the season goes on. And by the time that, when the football matters the most, he's, rolling on all cylinders. But for me, I think I'm sold on Avery Johnson. I just would like to see it and kind of stop talking about it at this point.
Yeah, he's got I would say the highest upside of any player in the conference. Maybe not as a NFL prospect, but he's got probably the highest ceiling of any player in the conference to win a Heisman Trophy one day. He's that fun to watch. He's that exciting. He's that gifted. There's no question about that. But still, as a freshman, he only completed 56% of his passes, which it's not alarmingly low, but it's still low. And the thing is, if he gets that number up to 60, he's still probably an elite quarterback. So that there's no doubt in my mind that he's going to be probably a top 5, top 6 quarterback in the league this year. My question with him is you're down 4 on the road, Jack Trice Stadium, November 30th. Can he lead a team down the field with his arm? Because over the course of the game, it gets a little harder to run. You might put a spy on him. That's where my question rests on Avery Johnson as a good to great quarterback. Because if Kyler Murray is a great example, if he can prove to make those throws time and time again, especially in the biggest moments, he very well could be the best quarterback in the Big 12.
And I will throw
Let's
Kyler
move
Murray's
on.
arguably he's probably the best high school player I've ever seen in person. So that probably has a little bit to do with it as well for the hype. So he's pretty damn good.
He's still the best player I've ever seen in person at a college game. That game, I believe it was 2018 in Ames. I've never seen anything like it. So even if he's great value, Kyler Murray, he would still maybe be the best quarterback in the Big 12. We've got a couple Friday night games in the Big 12 this week. How do you feel about Friday night football?
I think I'm a bit torn, honestly. Being down here in Texas, obviously Friday night football is king. Like high school football is throughout the state. It's dominant for sure. But at the same time, I think there's a window and an opportunity here for the Big 12 because I look at the Friday night slot as really an untapped market for the guys that, if you don't have kids or, if you aren't on a Friday, if you're at a bar, sports bar, whatever it may be, they're going to have a game on. They're going to have a college game on. You're probably going to pay attention to it somewhat, even if you're getting, maybe throwing a few bucks on it as well. But for me, it's an untapped market for the Big 12, and it could be one of those nice sweet spots for the conference. If it were up to me, and it's not because I'm not making Brett Yormark's salary, I would have at least one Big 12 game on Friday night every single week. On certain weeks, depending on where these home games are for certain teams, you might be able to double up on Friday night. Maybe you have a 6 o'clock game in Orlando, and then you have a 9:30 kickoff, in Boulder or, Provo, wherever it may be. I think there's definitely windows and opportunities there that the Big 12 could take advantage of because Like, let's face it, the SEC is not going to be playing on Friday night. They're not going to put any big games on Friday night. The Big Ten's not either. Maybe the ACC will have one or two here and there, but I really think it's a good untapped market for the conference if they're willing to explore that. And if they're willing to explore some basketball-only schools, I think this is where they kind of should put more of their focus on right here.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Friday night should be sacred for high school football. You give the kids the spotlight, makes it easier on the parents who are season ticket holders, but you're also right in the fact that it is an untapped market, and it's probably the only untapped time slot that's not taken over by the NFL, the big bad NFL, or college football. So this is a money-making league. It's a money-making sport. So I can't fault Brent Yormark if it's making money. And I agree with you. That's a really good point that I didn't think of. Make sure these are premier games. Don't put Cincinnati at Arizona State on a Friday night. Give me West Virginia, Cincinnati on a Friday night. Give me something that's going to draw in a bunch of eyeballs. And I think that would be the best way to grow the league.
I mean, we got Utah at UCF late Friday night I think it's on Black Friday. So I mean, you've got some great opportunities there. And it's laid out for it. If the conference wants to take advantage of, for sure, I think they should, like you said. But the opportunity is there.
So we talk about big games. Every game this year will be big for Baylor, as Dave Aranda, not a great kept secret, is probably on the hot seat. Do you think Dave Aranda keeps his job this year?
I do not. There's too many factors that kind of go into everything he's done. Jake, let me throw some facts on you here. Dave Aranda, 2-10 in his last 12 conference games dating back to 2022, 3-13 in his last 16 games overall as the Baylor head coach. I mean, is that anywhere acceptable at any place in this conference? Like, I don't think it is. To me, he got another chance because, honestly, he's a nice guy. He's well-liked and perceived in Waco. And trust me, he is a nice guy. I've met him multiple times at, media days and whatnot. But to me, that's what bought him another year, just because of how much he's liked there in Waco, and they want him to succeed. And now it appears that they're really giving him the resources to succeed, as you can see with their T-shirts and his famous slogan at Media Day, "We pay players." So, that really doesn't do for me. It's kind of more of a cool act. So I'm not really buying it because everybody buys players. I mean, that's not new news to me or anybody else. I've liked some of the moves they made. DeQuan Finn from Toledo was a nice ad. But they bring back some of their top receivers. Richard Reese is back. Their defense should be better. Like, I think they're going to be better than what they were a year ago. But I don't think they're going to be good enough to where it's going to save his job. Like, if Baylor makes a bowl game this year, like, that's going to be huge for them. But I don't even think they're going to get there. I think anything less than 7 wins, he's probably not going to be around for much longer to me.
Yeah, I echo all of that. But I also picked them to finish last in 2021, and they won a Big 12 championship. But last year, on this very network, I picked them to win the conference. I picked Baylor to beat Texas in the Big 12 championship game, and I was dead wrong. Couldn't have made a worse prediction. So, all that to be said, I've been wrong before, but they've got a tough schedule. Their road games, they kind of caught a bad break to where, I mean, you go to Utah. When you play Utah, that's probably a loss no matter where you play it. A team like a Baylor, but you also go to Colorado, to Texas Tech, to West Virginia, 3 of the middle of the road teams that you would rather get at home. Then they also go to Iowa State. So they very well could go 1-5 on the road. And then at that point, like you said, 7 wins is probably what it would take to even be considered to keep his job, especially at a place that prints money like Baylor. I'm in agreement with you. I'd say they go 5-7, and he's out the door probably as a defensive coordinator somewhere. But who would have thought that last year, especially me, because I picked them to win the Big 12. I'm not making that mistake again. Let's stick on the path of hot seats. What coach is safe right now? Maybe a neutral seat that could become hot. I've got a few
I don't.
candidates, but who's your
I've
best?
got I've got two that come to mind. I couldn't decide between either one of them, but I'm going to start with BYU's Kalani Sitake. 3 years ago, BYU was the 10-win team before they got in the conference. Each year since then, they've obviously gotten worse, and to me, they just don't have the pieces right now in place for me to believe them or to buy into them as being some kind of contender or a threat to win this conference. I mean, no disrespect to the quarterbacks they have. They're having a quarterback battle between Gary Bohannon and Jake Redloff. And, we saw Jake before. We've seen Jerry before in this conference, too. He's a former Baylor quarterback. But to me, those two guys aren't necessarily going to take you to the moon where you want to go. They were the worst rushing offense last year in the Big 12. So there's so many things that they have to fix. And if you can't run the football and you don't have great quarterback play in this conference, you're not going to win games. Like, it doesn't matter how good your defense is, you're just simply not going to win games. And I'm just not buying BYU as a contender this year, or I don't even see them as being inside the top 10 and when finishing in the conference. So I think Sitake's seed is going to be on fire.
Their game last year against Iowa State, it looked on TV like Iowa State was playing a group of 5 team. And that's where the concern with BYU is. If they don't improve up front drastically, they don't need to just improve. We'll talk about Iowa State in a minute about how they need to improve on the offensive line. BYU needs to go from probably a D- to a B+ to be above average in the conference. And from what I've seen, they're not there yet. And then you also are going to need a quarterback that isn't below replacement level. So that's a good call on him. I'll go Neil Brown. Last year, he easily entered the conference with the hottest seat. I don't know if there was anyone who would have thought he got out of that, other than I'll give Cyclone Larry credit. He told me before the season that West Virginia was going 8-4, and golly, Cyclone Larry was right. So he went from totally hot seat to safe. Where this year they've got, I'm not going to say expectations, because they're still expected to be a middling team in the Big 12. But I do fear the regression to the mean, to where you win a couple of those one-score games, couple turnovers. Garrett Green plays well here and there. If a few of those close wins turn into losses, you go 5-7, 4-8. We're right back where you started last year. And we know the potential that there could be in Morgantown. And if that fan base sits through a disappointing year and lose 2 or 3 games they shouldn't, I could see Neil Brown losing his job, even though he seems to be pretty safe right now.
Tough schedule this year, man. Brutal schedule this year for Neil Brown and company.
Yeah, it's hard. And that's another reason, is just, yeah. Well, I don't know who coaches this team, because frankly, I don't know if I've watched a UConn football game other than their Liberty Bowl against Kansas a couple of years ago. Or no.
Has anybody watched
Did
a
they play
UConn football game in the last 10 years?
No. So luckily, if this happens, it seems like they most likely wouldn't join the conference, but join the conference in football, rather. UConn to the Big 12. Do you like it? Do you love it? Do you hate it?
Again, one of those things where I think your Mark had an idea to bring in the basketball program, which obviously, look, the basketball program is second to none, back-to-back national champions. What we know, what they would bring to the table with basketball, they're a profitable brand, they're a profitable school. So we'll see what happens there. But at the same time, it comes with probably one of the worst football programs you could absolutely imagine. I mean, I totally forgot that. I had to look it up earlier, that Jim Mora was the head coach at UConn. They haven't won more.
Yeah.
Jake, get this. They haven't won more than 6 games in a season since 2010. That's how long it's been for them to win 6 games. That's how bad that football program is. Again, basketball, fantastic. Football is just, if we were using the Oakland A's Billy Beane analogy here, like, there's 50 feet of crap, and then there'd be UConn football. That's just the way it would be with them. Again, if it's profitable for basketball-only purposes, I'm all for it. I think they said the other sports would come along in 2026, I think it was. So I'm just not a fan of the football program. I don't think you can sacrifice, bringing in that program. And let's face it, like football pays the bills here, and you bringing that program in, what does that say?
Can I go all of it? Can I go, I love it, I like it, and I hate it? Let me start with hate. I hate it for football. A part of the country that doesn't care about college football, with a fan base that doesn't care about college football, with a program that I don't see developing anywhere near in the future. The silver lining, every every conference needs a Vanderbilt. So a free win here and there for programs probably wouldn't be the worst thing. I like it for men's basketball. I don't love it, and let me tell you why. One, you're adding an elite brand. Obviously great. Great for revenue. Great for conference image, to pair that with Kansas, Houston, Baylor, Arizona, Iowa State. But it makes the conference that much tougher, and that's where my Iowa State perspective comes in. I don't know if you need another elite brand, as fun as it would make the regular season. Like if you had UConn, you get to the point where winning a Big 12 regular season title is more impressive than winning a national title. I know that'll never be viewed that way, but just mathematically, your odds of going 13-5 and winning that conference is very, very slim. But let me tell you where I love it, and that's women's basketball, because I mean, you're getting the brand and
The standard.
the Big 12. The Big 12 in women's basketball is taking a large hit with the loss of Texas and Oklahoma, two schools that have been really, really, really solid for this entire century. So you've still got a name brand in Baylor. Iowa State is probably on that B tier for women's basketball brands, but you add in the S tier UConn, and that would do wonders for what I think would probably be a basketball only TV deal, whether it's with a Turner, an Amazon, something like that. And if that increases every school's revenue by 20%, it's a no-brainer. You don't care what happens with football at that point. If you can add a 20% pay bump or something like that, you got to do it. So I didn't answer that question because I'm kind of in all three categories. Let's go back to real football for a little bit. The Heisman. If you had to pick one Big 12 player to place your money on to win the Heisman Trophy this year, who would it be?
I've got two names here, but if I'm going to pick one, it's going to be Ollie Gordon, Oklahoma State running back Ollie Gordon. He led the country last season in rushing yards. I think arguably he's the best running back in the entire country. Oklahoma State returns a bunch of key starters up front. Something you don't see from Oklahoma State often is their great offensive line play, especially over the last few years. I think their running backs have had to really kind of create for themselves. I think Ollie Gordon is, I don't know if it's a generational talent, but he's a once in every probably 10 years guy. He's really that damn good. And to me, he's got the full package, like everything you want out of a running back. I think he's able to do. So for me, if he can come back and have a big year, I think he could be a guy that would end up in New York. The other one, I'll just throw this one out there, Jalen Daniels, Kansas quarterback Jalen Daniels. If he can stay healthy, like there's some real serious upside with him and that Kansas team, like some serious stuff that, the problem is, though, he just hasn't been healthy at any point in time throughout his career in Lawrence. So we'll see how that goes, but he would be another guy I'd probably watch out for.
In a perfect world, I agree with you. Ollie Gordon should have as good a shot as anybody to win the Heisman, but for whatever reason, it's transitioned into just a quarterback's award, which I hate. Yeah. I totally disagree with it. If this was, who could I find myself voting for at the end of the year? By the way, I don't have a Heisman vote, but if I did, I would not be afraid to vote for a running back, for a defensive end. Unfortunately, that's not how it's played out. And that's why I was between two guys that actually are teammates. But of course, if there's two teammates, it's going to be the guy who's throwing him the ball that would win. So I'm going to go with Noah Fafita. You can get him at plus 4,000. This would be a total value play where I don't think Arizona is going to be great. I think they'll be good. I think they're probably an 8-4 type team. But I do think there's a world with all of that star power they bring back on the offensive side of the ball that Brent Brennan I guess, brings in his guys from San Jose State and the defense is good. I see a world where they're 10-2 and Fafita just leads the country in passing, playing after dark. That would be probably my best value pick in the conference. And McMillan is incredible, but again, if he's got whatever 2,000 receiving yards, it's going to go to the guy who threw him the 4,000 passing yards, which again, I disagree with that from a philosophy standpoint, but I'd go Fafita. And we talk about Arizona. We talk about Arizona. One of the many teams that I believe can win the Big 12. This has been a question that I've probably thought about the most since we put together these questions a few days ago. How many teams can realistically win the conference? Because if you ask how many teams can win the conference, it's 16. But how many teams can realistically win the conference?
Well, I can tell you Baylor is not winning the conference, so we can throw out the 16 right now. I think we could agree on that. You know, I got asked this question the other day on one of my weekly mailbags for my website. So I said 10 teams, and I think that was probably where I was set on. Now, obviously, some teams are going to have a better chance than others. And I know I put Utah when I was filling out my preseason poll for the Big 12 this year. I had Utah at number 1, and I had TCU at 10. And everybody in between that, I said would be a contender. So that would include, Utah, Kansas State, Iowa State, Arizona, Kansas, Texas Tech, TCU, obviously. I'm probably going to miss some here now that I just keep saying this out loud.
UCF?
UCF, West Virginia, Texas Tech. Like, all those teams to me are definitely going to be in the mix. It wouldn't surprise me one bit if one of those 10 teams got into, Jerry World come December. Like, I would not be shocked at all, because it always seems like whatever year it is, it always happens like that, where a team just kind of comes out of nowhere and makes the conference title game. To me, this is the deepest conference in college football. It's America's conference. As the great Chris Williams would say, this is a meat grinder of a conference, and it truly is. He said that a few years ago, and it's been stuck in my head ever since, because it's absolutely true, and it's more true than ever, especially with these new teams coming in. This league is so deep. It's the deepest league in the entire country.
So I went a little higher than you. I went 12.
Ooh.
11 is probably the right number to cut the difference, because I do agree Baylor can't win the conference, but I just have to include them in the 12 because I have Dave Aranda PTSD from 2021. So instead of going through all the teams I think can win it, I'll just give them my 4 no's. Just no in bold: Arizona State, BYU, Cincy, Houston. I do not see a world where any of those teams are in Dallas. And that's how I approached this. I approached it, what teams could you see in Dallas? And who knows, maybe they're 18.5-point underdogs like Oklahoma State was to Texas last year. But if you're in Dallas, you've got a shot to win it. And in like the faintest of faint images, I could see Baylor, I guess, going 8-4, 9-3. Weird year, making a trip to Dallas. But yeah, do I really think 12 could actually win it? No, the number would probably be closer to 8. But
okay.
I think that speaks to the depth of the conference too, and maybe the lack of star power at the top, to where you could see a TCU, a Texas Tech, a West Virginia, teams that are 8, 9, 10 in odds to win the conference. You could easily see a couple balls bounce one way, a couple breaks there. They make a trip to Dallas and upset a Utah, K-State. So that leads well into our next question, which is, and I believe we're at question 9 out of 12, maybe 8 out of 12 so far. I'm bad at math. Can the Big 12 get multiple teams in the college football playoff? The 12-team college football playoff, in case you've been in a football coma all summer long.
That's been like the $1 million question ever since this new format came out. And like, I'm as a Big 12 as a Big 12 guy can get. I love this conference. I'm passionate about this conference, but I'm also a realist, and I understand that what this expanded playoff really did, and that was to give more SEC and Big 10 teams opportunities to get into the college football playoff. Like, this format was not made for the Big 12. It was made for those two power brands that, everybody wants to see, with, all the blue bloods in it. And let's be real here. I think you're only going to get one team from the conference in this year. Obviously, it's going to be the winner of the conference title game in December. They're going to be the one that gets in. Now, the good thing about that is even if you have an 8-4 conference champion, they're going to be in no matter what. The only way that the Big 12 is going to get 2 teams in the college football playoff is you're going to have one of the teams go undefeated, and then they'd have to suffer their first loss in the conference title game, because that's the only chance that they're going to have is you have a 1-loss team at the end of the season that's maybe going to be that second team to get in. Like if Utah goes undefeated and they lose the conference title game, they're still going to most likely get in. So for me, that's kind of my big issue with it. This is really about all the Big Ten and the SEC. They're the ones that are going to benefit it. Nick Saban, I saw Nick Saban's poll on 2 guys named Chris. I saw his picks or whatever. He had like 6 SEC teams in the college football playoff. Like, that's just ridiculous. Like, get out of here with that.
Yeah, and luckily the precedent has been set for that scenario you talked about. TCU went 12-0 2 years ago, lost the Big 12 title game, still was one of the 4 finalists. So there has been a precedent set, but I agree with you. It's one. It's going to be 190% of the years. The case for 2, you get a 2007 type year in college football where there's no dominant teams, and the Big 12 has to win the non-conference games. Iowa State has to beat Iowa. West Virginia has to beat Penn State. Not necessarily for those teams' cases, but for the rest of the conference's perception. If they can win 80% of those marquee out-of-conference games, that hypothetically should help the conference's image. Not that it would, because we all know kind of how the narrative runs throughout the sport. But I agree with you. Most years, it's going to be 1. Do I agree with that? Not at all. Let's go to 3 huge predictions for the season, all kind of involving futures. Who do you think is going to be the biggest overachiever this season?
I'm going to sound like a real homer here now that I'm with Iowa everywhere, but I'm picking Iowa State. I made a bold prediction last Friday that I put on Twitter. I said Iowa State has a legitimate chance to go 10-2. Like, I think there's a good path for them to get to 10 wins this season, which would be a first in program history. I really, really love what they bring offensively with Rocco Becht at quarterback. I think another year under his belt, he's going to be even better than what he was last year. Abu Sama emerged at running back as a superstar. Benjamin Brahmer at tight end was great. You have Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins on the outside. I think there's some really, really good pieces offensively for them to, you can make an argument that's probably like the best set of weapons a quarterback could ask for at Iowa State. Like that's probably about as good as it gets, So for me, that's really big. Defensively, they're going to be fine under John Haycock, and you got 2 of the best safeties in football. So I'm not really too worried about the defense too much either. So for me, Iowa State is one of those teams that can really sneak up on people. And, they, by the month of November, if you look at the schedule, it's pretty favorable, I think, up until, you kind of get to November, then you got to play Kansas State and Utah. But up until that point, I think they have a very favorable schedule. I think they could really surprise some people this year.
This was a tough question for me, and I agree with everything you just said. This was a tough question for me because it is nationally viewed that it's such a deep conference that so many teams could win it, that it's hard to be like, oh yeah, UCF snuck up out of nowhere, which is why I'm going to go lower, and I'm going to go TCU. Last I checked, 10th best odds to win the Big 12. This program was in a national championship game 20 months ago. 20 months ago. And I know you got to give a lot of that credit to Max Duggan. That guy was awesome. Tough as nails, clutch as nails. But still, they shouldn't have been 12-0 that year, but they were, because they found ways to win games. Was there a lot of regression to the mean last year? Sure, they went 5-7. But could there be regression to the mean the opposite way this year, and those 1-score games they lost become an 8-4 type season? And again, we don't know what the Big 12 season will be like this year. We don't know if 8-4 can get you in the Big 12 title game. It very well could. I'm going to bank on all of that recruiting momentum that Sonny Dykes got out of playing in a national championship game. Those guys are sophomores now. I think TCU could jump up, surprise some teams, and be right in the hunt in November. And on the flip side, let's go biggest underachiever.
You kind of talked about them in a more positive manner than I'll probably talk about here. But I think Arizona, and the reason I say that, and let me start with Arizona. Noah Fafita is arguably one of the best quarterbacks in this conference right away. He's fantastic, high completion percentage, low turnovers. So he's like everything you want in a quarterback. McMillan obviously is like an all-American receiver, but I worry about them up front on both sides of the ball in the trenches. So to me, that's where I have my most concerns. Plus, you're coming into a new conference with a brand new head coach. That kind of scares me a little bit. I know everybody wants to talk about them being one of those, dark horse teams to maybe get, win the conference. But for me, there's just too many things going against them right now for me to say like, oh, they're going to finish in the top 5 in this conference when everybody, some people had them as high as 2 or 3 in the conference, but I'm not just ready to put them there quite yet. Maybe give it another year or two, but for me, there's just too many factors working against Arizona right now. But, we'll see. I think they're going to really find out about the depth in the league and the depth you need to have, on your roster.
I'm really, really curious to see how the travel plays out, especially for Arizona. It's going to be the same for Arizona State, but I just think they're going to be more irrelevant these first couple of years in the league. But I'm really curious to see if it evens out over the course of the year. Like, how much of a boost do they get? I don't have the schedule in front of me, but how much of a boost they get from welcoming West Virginia into Tucson? How much of a boost do they get from welcoming Iowa State into Tucson next year? But also on the flip side, what does it do to them to go to Orlando? What does it do to them to go to Cincinnati? I think that's one of the biggest wild cards in the Big 12 that you can't quantify before the season. You've just got to see it play out. And we've seen some really, really weird things happen in Pac-12 after dark over the years. So I'm curious to see what that does to Arizona. And
it's now going to be the Big 12 after dark.
Yeah, and that's awesome. Gosh, Big 12 from 11 a.m. Central to midnight. Oh, boy. Oh, man. There's nothing better. That's going to be, 3-4 days away? I can't wait. For my biggest underachiever, this is something you also can't quantify before the season because it's hasn't happened yet, but injuries, which is why I'm going to go Kansas. Probably always going to be a pretty trendy pick, pretty popular team, just because Jalen Daniels is so fun to watch. But they lost their offensive coordinator, Andy Kotelnicki, to Penn State. You don't have Jason Bean, who, if not the best backup in the country, probably the best backup in the league, to have as that insurance blanket for when Jalen probably inevitably goes down, whether it's for 1 game or 6 games. You don't have home field advantage. They're playing some of their home games at, I think, a middle school, something like that, playing a couple at Arrowhead. But one of those games at Arrowhead is going to turn into a road game because Iowa State will bring more fans to Kansas City than Kansas will. And yeah, you add all that in with the injury risk. I would sell Kansas. My case for Kansas, they've got a really easy schedule. But all of that I just laid out, if those 4 things play against them like I think they will, I don't think the schedule will matter that much. I still think they're a 7-5 team, which would be considered a disappointment probably in my eyes and most people's eyes. And let's close out with this, the biggest prediction of them all. Who plays in the Big 12 title game and who wins it? Who's going to the college football playoff?
I can't tell you how many times I've been back and forth over the last couple months with this. I'll start by you saying Utah. I've had Utah in there from day one. Utah bringing back Cam Rising, a healthy Cam Rising, and his tight end Brent Kuithe. They've added some weapons to the transfer portal with Dorian Singer. Defensively, I think they're probably the best defense in the Big 12 and probably a top 10 defense in the entire country. So their schedule is, boy, they got like a Christmas gift, when they got that schedule because it is very friendly for them. So I think everything is going to work in the favor of Utah this year. And obviously, playing over there in Salt Lake is an extremely tough environment to play in, especially at night. The other team I'm going to say, and I've probably said Kansas State, I don't know how many times, but I think I'm fully switched now on putting Oklahoma State back into Jerry World, for the second time in 2 years. they bring back just so many people. And I know the schedule is a little bit tough, but Alan Bowman coming back for like his 10th year now, it seems like. You have Ollie Gordon, a Heisman candidate who we both mentioned earlier. You got Brennan Presley, Rashad Owens on the outside. Like, there's so many weapons for them to work with offensively. If Bowman can kind of cut down on some of the turnovers and some of the inconsistent play, I think they have a really good chance of being one of the better offenses in the league. And the other thing is their defense obviously needs to get better, but they return so much production on that side of the ball. Like, I think they're going to be improved as under Brian Yardo in year 2. So there's a lot to like about the Cowboys. So I'm going to go Utah, Oklahoma State, and I'm going to go as Utah as my winner. I guess it's kind of a cop-out answer, but I'm going Utah.
I'll go Utah over Iowa State. And I think this year, I think that second team that'll play Utah, it's going to come down to the last game of the season. I think it'll be down to Iowa State and Kansas State one way or the other. I don't know if there are tiebreakers in this conference because last year nobody knew them. So I hope they've got that figured out because it'll probably be needed. But I think that game in Ames in November will decide who's going to the Big 12 championship. And under Matt Campbell, if you count the year where Alan Lazard got interfered with and they picked up the flags, which we're going to count that, Iowa State's 5-2 against K-State under Campbell. I would like Iowa State and Ames in that game in November. But yeah, I think Utah's just a different beast. And as long as they're healthy, which is, again, is a big if, Cam Rising has dealt with injuries in his career, I don't see a likely world where Utah isn't playing for a national championship come December. And it's too bad that the Big 12 champion won't get to host a playoff game, because Salt Lake City during a whether it's a quarterfinal or a semifinal game, that would be a sight to see. And I'd love to see a team like LSU or a team like Clemson have to go there and play in that atmosphere and that weather in late December. But yeah, man, that was 12 and 12, a little more than 12 minutes. And hopefully you guys catch up on the joke over the course of this show. We'll probably try and go a little quicker than that most weeks, but all that matters is that we're having some good discussion, and I thought that went pretty well. So we'll be workshopping this over the course of the season. It's preseason for us too. We got to warm up against an FCS opponent.
I just hope we don't have to talk about tiebreakers. I hope we don't have to talk about tiebreakers, because I don't think we could spend an hour talking about tiebreakers, and I think I'd still be confused. I don't think Einstein could have figured that one out. It doesn't make any damn sense.
We'll put producer Aiden on that, and he can figure out the tiebreakers. And actually, speaking of Aiden, we got to bring him in here, because one way that we're going to break up the show in between segments, so every week in between our Big 12 and Iowa State talk, we're going to have Aiden come in here and give us a trivia question about the state of Iowa. And if I get it wrong and Derek gets it right,
that'd be a tough
that speaks to just how much of an Iowan as an underachievers.
You got to give me your Iowa card if that happens.
Yeah, I'll send it right to you. Aiden, what's our question this week?
All right. The world's largest concrete gnome is located in what town? Hint, it's in Iowa.
All right. That narrows it down. Is it? No, I'm thinking of something. I'm thinking of the world's largest nickel. That's in Coralville. World's largest gnome. I got nothing.
I'm gonna guess Polk City. I don't know. I don't. That's all I got.
Let's go Spencer, Iowa. Final answer.
It's Ames.
Oh,
really? Where at?
Yeah. Just south of north of Jack.
Okay.
South of Jack Trice Stadium.
That's actually a really logical answer. I just went for the most random town I could think of.
Can't miss
it. You're right.
It's 15 feet tall and 3,500 pounds.
You know, I think I remember reading something about that.
You can miss it because I got my eyes set on beautiful Jack Trice Stadium, and every time I'm driving down there on University Avenue.
And the bridge.
See, that's how you say it.
From that bridge.
Yeah. They should put the gnome on the bridge. Then
it's an idea.
Then you'll really get people noticing it. Well, I guess why we talk about Ames. let's talk a little Iowa State football and a mini season preview of its own. What makes or breaks this season for Iowa State?
I think we kind of touched on it earlier. I've already mentioned on the weapons they have with Rocco and Abusama, Brahmer, Noel Higgins. So there's a lot to like offensively with the pieces that they have. Taylor Mouser has a plethora of weapons to work with, and I'm excited to see what he can do as a play caller. So for me, it comes down to the trenches on both sides of the ball, man. I think I've already said the talent's there. I think the offensive line needs to take another step forward. Last season, Iowa State finished 11th in rushing in the conference. They're averaging a little under 120 yards. I think realistically, for you to be considered a good rushing offense, you need to be somewhere between 175 and 200. And we saw teams, like UCF and West Virginia, they were around that 200 mark. And I think if you're able to run the football that well in this conference, that really says something, and it really helps take pressure off your quarterback, obviously, and opens more things up throughout the play action. For me, that's really the biggest improvement I want to see for Iowa State is up front on the offensive line. And you could probably say that for the last, I don't know how many years for them, but that's definitely one of my points. The same thing defensively. I think they need to create more pressure up front. Obviously, things are going to be changing a little bit as Iowa State's going to be, moving down to 4 down linemen at times. So they had 21 sacks last season. I don't think that's anywhere near good enough for this defense. When you had the guys previously, do so well upon that defensive line. I do want to say one thing I think that's going to help is Caleb Bacon. I love his name. He's got one of the best names in all of college football. I think he's going to really
it's a linebacker name.
Yeah, it's perfect, and obviously with the collective and everything, it fits. So, but for me, he's really going to be a guy that keeps on getting better and better as years go on, and I think he's really going to emerge as a superstar this year in this conference.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. It all comes down to the trench play. You'll hear me talk about it this year. The kicking too, the special teams been horrible throughout the Campbell era. Last year was pretty good. So if they can stay on that trajectory, average special teams over the Campbell era probably wins you 3, 4, 5 more games, which is crazy, but it's true. So as long as they don't shoot themselves in the foot on special teams, this season all comes down to the trench play. And it's two contrasting ideas because under Matt Campbell, I would say the offensive line has been good once, and that was in 2020. All the other years, they've been between awful and below average, whereas the defensive line, really since 2017 when they moved to the 3-man front, they've been dominant every year but 1 year, and that was last season. So do both revert to normal? If that's the case, I don't feel great about Iowa State's offense because as good as those weapons are, Bramer, Noel Higgins, if you can't run the football, it's going to make those games against Utah, K-State, Kansas that much more difficult. And on the flip side, if the front seven reverts closer to what a John Haycock defense has been, even like in 2022 when they probably had the best defense in the league, but the offense was awful. If you can get back to number 3, number 4, number 5 unit on defense, paired with what the potential that Iowa State has on offense, that's where you're looking at a Big 12 championship season. And if that's the case, if both offensive and defensive lines are, I'll go as far to say this, if Iowa State's offensive line is even slightly below average, they will have a top 4 offense in the league. Like the bar is not that high for the offensive line because everything surrounding it is so good. And then if you talk to getting like average to good, the sky truly is the limit. This is a question I've been thinking about a lot, and it's been talked about quite a bit on Two Guys. We'll go to record. And I can go first with this. What would you consider a disappointment and a success? And I kind of built out a chart to what I think. So I think 7 or less would be an extreme disappointment. I know the win total is 7.5. I think that's a notch low. It should probably be 8 flat. I think another 7-5 season, that would be the same as last year when you didn't really know what you had coming off the gambling investigation. You lost to Ohio, you lost to Iowa, and you still won 7 games. I think that'd be a disappointment if that was all you got too. I think 8 is probably neutral. It's obviously what Vegas would say is the most likely. I don't think there's many fans that would be unhappy, maybe mad with 8 wins, but I don't think there's going to be an extreme hype around it in the fan base if there's 8 wins. And then 9+ I think is your 9 is probably your great, really great season, and 10+, that's gravy. It's never been done in school history. So that's kind of where I went. But this is something that honestly I don't think gets talked about too much. Iowa State hasn't lived up to expectations once under Matt Campbell. If you go year by year, 16, let's throw away first year, 17, no expectations, blew them away. Win in Norman, beat number 4 TCU. One of the most memorable seasons in school history. 2018, that's the weird one where you could make the argument that they exceeded expectations just because you didn't know what the expectations were, losing so many guys from that veteran-led 2017 team. But because of 2018 and the success there with Brock Purdy, 2019 was an extreme disappointment. Ended in a blowout loss to Notre Dame in the Camping World Bowl. 2020, because of that loss to Notre Dame and COVID, the expectations weren't too high. Then you had your best season in school history. Literally everyone comes back. 2021, the most disappointing season in school history. You kind of get the pattern. 2022, you lose a lot of those guys, bad season. And then 2023, no expectations, blow them out of the water. But through all of that, you've only exceeded expectations when they're low. They have not lived up to high expectations once. And this year, there are high expectations based off of this conversation we're having right now.
I think everything you said there is totally fair. I probably got some similar things. I just wrote down a few records here. For me, a disappointing season for me for Iowa State this year would be 6-6. Like getting to a bowl game, just making it to a bowl game, I don't think would be considered a successful season there. I would consider that a disappointment with how talented I think this team actually is and what they should be able to do. A successful record, in my opinion, would probably be 9 wins. I think anything over 8 would probably be pretty damn good for me. And my final prediction, as I mentioned in my bold predictions, I have them at 10-2. Like this is the year where I think they finally break through that 9-win wall. So I think this is the year that they get the job done, and they have a chance. I said it earlier, to be undefeated or maybe 1 loss heading into the month of November. And whenever you're playing in November and you've got that many wins, I mean, you're going to be playing basically for a Big 12 title. Like your playoff starts in November at that point. So, and Matt Campbell's always said they wanted to play, winning football, championship quality football in the month of November. So I think they're going to get their shot at it definitely this year. So for me, I think that's where they end up. I think this is the year where they finally pull it all together.
If you're watching on video, I'm not sure if you saw, Derek, but I just spilled water on myself while you were talking. And then when I was looking down to see how much water I spilled on myself, I smoked the bill of this hat on the mic. So
you're good.
Not a great moment for me right there, but thank you to everyone who's, whether you're watching on video or listening to the podcast. The video product that Iowa Everywhere puts out is great. And a lot of that is thanks to the really, really good and hard work out of Aiden Wyatt. You just did it. You said 10-2, your record prediction. I'll go 9-3 with losses to Iowa, at West Virginia, and at Utah. But again, those Iowa-West Virginia games, probably 1-score games in the fourth quarter. So the margin between an all-time great season in school history and the margin between a mediocre season, it's going to be 5-6 plays here and there. And that really was the difference between 2022 and 2023. And that's football. That's why we love talking about it.
That's the Big 12 for you. That's the Big 12.
Especially the Big 12. You're not having conversations like that down there in Athens, Georgia. You're not having conversations about that in Columbus, Ohio. There's not often going to be 5-6 plays that determine those team seasons between 12-0 and 7-5. And that's some people might not like that about the Big 12, but I know me and you both love it. And speaking of the Big 12, this is another fun little break we're going to take each episode. Aiden's going to come in and he's going to give us 3 hints for a random Big 12 quarterback in the last, say, 20-ish years. And this one I'm excited for because Aiden, we'll let you make the rules on this one. Could you throw an old like BYU quarterback at us? Could you throw an old Texas A&M quarterback at us? What's the line there?
Okay, I say if they played in the Big 12. Sorry, I got a puppy here.
Okay.
They played in the Big 12 at all. So like, it could be an A&M quarterback. It can't be like a Utah quarterback.
Okay.
That's
Gotcha.
fair.
So obviously this year. So you guys ready for this?
Yep.
All right. He played in purple.
Okay.
His whole career did not end up in the Big 12, but part of it did.
I got your answer.
Really? That quick, huh?
It's got to be Andy Dalton, TCU, right?
Close.
No?
Close.
Oh.
Wait, so there's one more hint, right?
Well, the hint was going to be he was the
Oh, wait.
backup to 2 NFL quarterbacks. What ended up being 2 NFL quarterbacks.
Ooh.
And backup might be a stretch, honestly. I
So
think
you're saying he
you're
might
gonna
have
know
been
exactly
a
what I'm
third
talking
string?
about.
Was it Kenny Hill?
No.
Oh wait, he never transferred, I don't think.
Only other guy I could think of would have been Trevon Boykin. But I don't think, is that the right
You're
answer?
so close.
Oh my gosh. I don't think I can guess anymore. Oh, somebody out there is just laughing at this and already has the answer and just clowning us right now. But I'm probably going to have to tap out on that one.
Anything else, Jake?
I see it in my mind and I just don't know.
All right. It is TCU legend, Casey Paul Hall.
Oh.
So, Derek, you literally got the quarterbacks that sandwiched him.
Yeah.
You nailed. So that's why
you
said
win.
He wasn't really a backup because he was suspended and
That's a
his
name.
first starts.
That's a name I hadn't heard in probably 15 years. He had some troubles there.
And then Boykin got suspended as well, didn't he? And isn't that how Kenny Hill? Isn't that how Kenny Hill got the job?
Right. I forgot about that.
Boykin's last year there was 2015, and I can't remember. He got in some trouble before that Alamo Bowl, and then they had that magical comeback.
Yeah, it was before a bowl game.
Mm-hmm.
And then Hill was from A&M. Hill was at A&M, and then came over in 16 because the first year I started covering the conference is when Hill got to TCU. I remember that. So yeah,
that's where I got Kenny Hill.
Yeah.
That's where I got Kenny Hill because transfer. But wait, you wouldn't have done Kenny Hill because that was the example I gave you over text.
Yeah. So Jake
why did I guess Kenny Hill?
I need you to come up with the Big 12 quarterback. I'm like, all right, Kenny Hill's my guy. And then he's like, no, it's supposed to be a surprise. We're going to try to guess it. I'm like, oh, okay.
That was a good one. That was definitely a blast from the past there.
Yeah. So we're going to do that exercise every week, and hopefully the viewers, the listeners back home can have some fun and challenge us and use the Scouts Honor Rule to, if you get it right, tweet it at us and call us morons, especially if we get it wrong. Like that one. Well, we're gonna wrap up in about 5 minutes, but we're gonna kind of go through some picks for week 1 and how we're gonna do this once the Big 12 season starts. We're gonna just go down, predict every game. Some weeks that'll be 8, with bye weeks that could get down to 6 or 7. But with these games against a lot of FCS opponents, we're just gonna narrow it down to 5 this week, and we're gonna track our standings throughout the season. Let's start with Penn State at West Virginia. Easily.
Who saved that one for last? I want to save that one for last if possible.
So let's go let's go. Yeah, we'll start with probably the biggest blowout potential on the list. We've got New Mexico at Arizona. Arizona's 30.5-point favorites over the Lobos. My analysis of this game, New Mexico's terrible. I watched their game against Montana State this past weekend, and that's enough for me to I'm going to lay the points there with Arizona. Despite the new coach, I think that offense should be able to do plenty against New Mexico.
Yeah, New Mexico awful last season. I had to look up. Bronco Mendenhall is actually the head coach there, former BYU and Virginia head coach. So pretty interesting. I'm going to take the under. The under was set at 57. I'm going to take the under in this game. That's my play here.
Let's move on to North Dakota and Iowa State. The Cyclones favored by 27 at home with the over-under at 51.5. I've been going back and forth all week on this one. I think I like Iowa State with the points. I know they've struggled against FCS opponents in the past, but once I look at North Dakota, I see a North, so it gets me a little worried because I think it says Northern Iowa for a second, but it doesn't. And then you see North Dakota and you're like, oh, State, the Bison? No, there's no State either.
Nope.
I think Iowa State should be able to handle the Fighting Hawks now, as I recently learned is their new nickname. I think Iowa State should handle them. Their secondary, not great. They still don't know who their quarterback is. It should be a game where Iowa State forces 2-3 turnovers, and you just kind of spam Higgins, Noel Bramer, and put up 40 points and win a 40-10 type game.
Yeah, I'm gonna take another cop out thing here. I'm taking the under in this one. The under was set at 51.5. I don't know if Iowa State's going to cover that spread, but I feel safer taking the under in this one. And even if it is a 40-10 game, I still feel good about it. So I'm taking the under 51.5 here.
That's probably a better call. No, I'm thinking about it, but I'm sticking with Iowa State at 27. This is, like we referenced earlier, one of those Friday games. TCU on the road at Stanford, your classic Big 12 ACC battle out there in Palo Alto, California. The Horned Frogs favored by 9.5 on the road. I'm going to take Stanford to cover the 9.5.
Ooh.
These Friday night games, really weird. I still don't really know what I'm going to get. I know I picked TCU as the biggest overachiever. I still don't really know what I'm going to get out of the quarterback spot for the Horned Frogs. Week 1 game, packed or ACC after dark. I guess that sounds a little more depressing.
So weird.
Give me Stanford week 1. If this game was week 3, I'd probably take TCU.
I'm going the opposite. I'm going TCU. They're going to cover. I'm excited about Josh Hoover and this new look TCU team. I think they got enough juice to cover that 9.5 spread. And the other thing is, I just wonder, you said ACC after dark or whatever. That just sounds terrible. And how empty are the stands going to be in Palo Alto? Like, they look like JV high school games out there. So I think it's going to be just a weird environment.
Yeah, I never know which way to go with those empty. Like, I don't even know if empty is the right word. Deserted stadium. Yeah. That might fit better. 2 more to go. This one I'm probably more excited for than our marquee game, just because of all the potential that could come from this game. The Bison of North Dakota State go on the road to Coach Prime in Colorado. And for those at home that maybe don't follow your FCS football as closely as some, this really isn't your North Dakota State teams of the past, but they're still North Dakota State. They're still a top 3 or 5 program in the FCS, and they've still got the history that they do. Derek, what do you think? I'll let you go first on this one.
The trenches are going to be what I'm going to be watching here. I know all the eyes are going to be on Sanders and Hunter and all those guys, but to me, the trenches are what's going to be the factor in this game. And I'm saying North Dakota State. I don't think they're going to win. I'll go on record of saying that, but I think North Dakota State is going to cover that 9.5 spread. And they're notorious. Like you've said, this isn't a North Dakota State team of the past, not the one that has won a bunch of national titles, but they are notorious for pulling off these types of upsets. But I don't think it's going to happen, but I think they cover.
If it's 2017, I'm taking North Dakota State with the points, and then I'm probably sprinkling some money line on it. I might still do that this year just because why not? It'd be fun. But I'm going to zag. I think Colorado covers. We saw how they started the year last year. And I think there's something, especially to the Travis Hunter effect, where he's playing both sides of the ball to where he's just going to wear down over the course of the season. Like, I truly believe he's as special of a player as he looked like in weeks 1, 2, 3, and 4 last year. I think he'll look similar to that to start this season. And I think you pair the buzz that's still in Boulder about Colorado, whether warranted or not. Oh, there's some thunder out over here in beautiful central Iowa. I think Colorado doesn't comfortably win. I see kind of a garbage time touchdown for a 13, 14-point win. But I don't feel great about that. I'll never feel great about picking against North Dakota State, ever. And then let's close with the marquee game with the high stakes in the conference this week. Penn State goes on the road to little old Morgantown, where they are an 8.5-point favorite against the Mountaineers. I cannot wait for this game.
Give me yours first, because I got something I gotta say, but I'll let you go first on this one.
As much as I hate to say it, I like Penn State. I think the atmosphere is going to be ridiculous, but the one thing that Penn State doesn't do is beat Michigan, beat Ohio State. The one thing they do is beat literally everybody else. And I think Drew Aller probably gets a little too much flack for not being able to go into the big house and beat Michigan, beat Ohio State at home. But I think he's good enough to beat West Virginia on the road in a somewhat comfortable fashion, like we saw last year in Happy Valley.
You know, over the weeks, I've just been talking myself into this game so much. Penn State favored by 8.5. I think forget about the points. I'm going West Virginia money line. They're pulling off the upset. This team's got something to prove. I think there's going to be a party in Morgantown. I can spell the moonshine, the pepperoni rolls, and the burning couches all the way from here. I'm taking the West Virginia Mountaineers to pull off the upset.
That is awesome. For those listening on podcast, that was a money gun, and it just blew out a lot of money. Derek, if that happens, I'll be sending you a video of me shotgunning a Busch Light, and we'll call it moonshine. I don't know if I could shotgun moonshine. That I got to work Sundays, so that'd be a problem. But man, if that happens, we're gonna be having some interesting conversations on the show next week. Either way, I think West Virginia leads our program in the middle of next week. Whether it's great, whether it's bad, that's probably going to be the biggest thing that comes out of this week, unless our good friends to the north and west that for some reason say bison and not bison can do the unthinkable and go into Boulder, Colorado. But yeah, it's our first episode. We went a little long on you. We probably won't go 85 minutes or no, 75 minutes every week. But
not bad.
Hopefully you enjoyed it.
Work in progress.
Tweet at us, Jake Brend TV. Derek, is yours just Derek Duke 25? Is that correct?
That is correct.
Give us both a follow on X, on Twitter. Send us a DM if you got some ideas. But most importantly, be sure to like and subscribe to Iowa Everywhere, YouTube, Spotify, podcast, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen, wherever you watch. It helps us so much. And we'll be back next week on Bigger Than 12.